Hey, what you reading for?
Clive Barker is one of my favorite authors of all time. Probably my favorite author. His writing is gorgeous, inventive. His stories are immersive and challenging, often legit scary even. Yet, sometimes when I try to recommend to people that they read Clive Barker, sometimes they will respond to me by saying, "Oh, but I don't read horror," or "I don't read fantasy." Okay, okay, fine. You don't read horror. You don't read fantasy. Okay, that's fine. But I contend that Clive Barker's catalog is so rich and diverse that there is a Clive Barker book for every kind of reader. So, with that in mind, I have created 6 categories of readers or types of reading experiences. And for each category, I will select 1 or 2, possibly 3 Clive Barker books to fit that specific reader. So sit back, relax, hit that subscribe button actually before you do that, and we'll get started. In addition to being a brilliant writer, Clive Barker is also a filmmaker and an amazing painter. So what I'd like to do to kick this off is to share with you some of the art he has created. I've prepared a short slideshow featuring some of his art and featuring the music of Alfred Schnittke. I'll run that slideshow and I'll see you on the other side to talk about the best of Clive Barker. Clive Barker is a horror writer, but he also wrote a lot of fantasy and often blended the two. So if you are looking for horror and you stumble upon one of his fantasy works, you might not get the reading experience you were hoping for. So if it is blood you want, Clive Barker has you covered. His 6 short story collections, the Books of Blood, are must read for horror fans. I have a personal slight preference for volumes 1 and 4, but if you pick up any one of those collections, you will not be disappointed. Likewise, his short novel or novella, The Hellbound Heart, is an iconic work of horror. It has evil, murder, betrayal, sadism, otherworldly entities, lots of ripping of the flesh, and lots of blood. This work and its movie adaptation Hellraiser are perhaps best known for giving us a puzzle box known as the Lament configuration or Le Marchand configuration after its creator. A puzzle box that opens the door to hellish realms of unfathomable pain. A pain that is the pleasure of these beautifully grotesque entities called Cenobites, one of whom is the iconic Pinhead. In this book, he's simply known as the Priest. He is an intense pleasure seeker with a bald head symmetrically studded with thick nails. It's worth mentioning that Pinhead, or the Priest, is a minor character who shows up towards the end of the book. So if you go into the Hellbound Heart expecting a lot of Pinhead, you might not get the reading experience you are hoping for. But if you go into it wanting blood and flesh being torn apart, that kind of good fun, right? Then the Hellbound Heart will be a very satisfying read. I'll also recommend his first novel, The Damnation Game. This leans more towards action horror. There are many locations. I think when a horror book has many locations, that automatically makes it an action horror, plus the action. I mean, it's hard to go for a creepy ambience or in-depth character study when the story jumps around from location to location. The Damnation game starts off in Warsaw, Poland, immediately following World War II. And it is one of the best opening scenes in all of horror. There are many things that Clive Barker does masterfully, and writing phenomenal opening scenes is one of those things. And I think the Damnation game is a great example of this. It centers around gambling addicts who flock to Warsaw after the war to bet on anything and everything. The more morbid, the better. And there's a man who makes a deal with a Faustian figure, a deal he would later try to go back on, which is what propels the story into the present day or 1985 London. Also, for horror fans, there is the criminally underrated Cold Heart Canyon from 2001. In this creepy, fantastical horror, we have a Hollywood heartthrob who hides out in a mansion outside of Hollywood while he tries to recover from a botched plastic surgery. Now, this mansion was built by a silent movie star who had a predilection for hosting wild orgies. And these were not your standard fare orgies. This is not your grandmother's orgy. These orgies were about degradation and humiliation and copulation with wild beasts that spawn these hideous half-human hybrids whose ghosts still haunt the mansion at Cold Heart Canyon. This is not your typical haunted house story. It's a wild one, but I think it is an excellent entry in the Clive Barker canon, especially if you're interested in ghost sex. It's got that going for it. On the other side of the coin, there are fantasy readers who think of Clive Barker as a horror writer. They're thinking, I don't read horror, I read fantasy. Why would I read Clive Barker? It's true that Clive Barker does write horror, but he also writes fantasy, and I think he is one of the best fantasy writers to ever do it. Do you like world building? Is that important to you as a reader? Because no one does world building like Clive Barker. Simply masterful. There are 3 fantasy books from Clive Barker that I would recommend for the strictly fantasy reader. The first is his epic masterpiece, Magica. A man hires an assassin to kill his unfaithful wife. He immediately regrets it, so he contacts her lover, an expert art forger, to try and prevent the assassination. The assassin he hired is a powerful slave from another dimension. That's how this epic story opens. Where it takes the reader, I lack the skills or the time to adequately describe. Rich warring worlds that exist in another dimension, a dimension that is on the brink of colliding with our own. Now, of all the fantastic works that Clive Barker has created, he has openly and unequivocally stated that he thinks that Magica is his best, and many readers agree with him. It is not my personal favorite book from Clive Barker, but I do agree that it is an excellent example of world building and intrigue and a must-read, I would think, for fantasy readers. My favorite Clive Barker book is another book that I think fantasy readers would love, and that is Weave World. Unlike a Magica, the majority of Weave World takes place in our world. However, there is also a magical fantasy world that is under threat. So much so that it weaves itself into a rug in order to hide. And this rug, consequently, is coveted by a villain called the Salesman, who's one of the coolest villains in all of literature. And this villain, the Salesman, he wants to find the rug and sell it to the highest bidder. Plenty of action, magic, fantasy, exceptional world building. Weave World is a masterpiece. And like a Magica, a super high recommendation for fantasy readers. And lastly, for fantasy readers, I will also recommend Everville. Everville is the second book in the two-part series, The Books of the Art. And while it is technically a sequel, I do believe it works as a standalone. And in terms of fantasy, I think it is the stronger of the two. There is a power known as the art. Power-mad people are trying to access the art, and others are trying to prevent them from accessing it. There's also a higher plane of human consciousness known as the Sea of Quiddity, which is a literal physical sea that exists in another dimension. However, this dimension can be reached via a temporary breach located on a mountain slope on the northwest coast of the United States. A very difficult book to describe. In Everville, Clive Barker creates compelling characters and thrusts them into the heart of the human mystery, into a fantastical world of revelation where forces that shape the human experience threaten to utterly destroy it. Everville is peak Clive Barker fantasy form. If you are a fantasy reader, definitely check it out. Then there's the reader who is interested in neither horror nor fantasy. Give me romance, they say. Give me a love too marvelous to exist, yet too powerful and pleasant not to be pined for. For this reader of romance, I will make 2 book recommendations covering both ends of the romance spectrum, starting with Galilee from 1998. In Galilee, we have a rich, powerful family from Louisiana, and this family is the result of a union between a man and a goddess. A young woman from a modest upbringing, she marries into the family. It's a sort of Cinderella story, yet it's tragic because the marriage is not what she had hoped for. Her Prince Charming turns out not to be as charming or as princely as he led her to believe. This young woman, she is not the only woman to have married into this family only to be disappointed. In fact, the problem is so common that the women of this family, they have banded together and have come up with a solution. And the solution comes in the form of a house in a remote part of Hawaii. In a house, the men in the family are forbidden to enter. And when the women stay in this secluded house, a sailor, dark and handsome, he comes to them on a boat of white sails. He comes to them and he loves them in a way that their husbands never could, in a way that surpasses even their most audacious dreams. This sailor who comes to them, his name is Galilee, and this forms a subplot, a very important subplot to the greater story that is Galilee. But it has a Frenchman's Creek kind of vibe, but Frenchman's Creek but with magic. And I think it's very satisfying for romance readers. On the other end of the spectrum for romance readers is Sacrament from 1996. At its core, Sacrament is a fantasy horror, but there is a love story that drives the narrative. Several love stories, in fact. But it is a very different kind of love that is explored in Sacrament. The love explored in this book is one of bittersweet tragedy, of loss and pain. The loss and pain that often, if not always, accompanies love. Perhaps it is this loss and pain that gives love its power over us, that inspires in us this unrivaled sense of awe. Sacrament is Clive Barker's most emotional work. In this book, a man, the protagonist, he returns to San Francisco at the height of the AIDS pandemic, where he has to say goodbye to friends and former lovers. There's also another character, a woman who is in love with this man, the protagonist, but since he is gay, she has to learn to adjust her love, to transform it from a romantic love into one of friendship or more of a sibling kind of love. It's not easy for her, but love rarely is easy, isn't it? Then there's the reader who couldn't care less about love. Enough of that touchy-feely nonsense. Give me action. Okay, I hear you. Clive Barker hears you. And for action fans, I am going to recommend The Great and Secret Show, the first book of the art from 1989. Like many of Clive Barker's works, The Great and Secret Show has a phenomenal opening scene. This man is working a dead-end job in a mail hub in Omaha, Nebraska, where he's sorting through mail that, because it was incorrectly addressed or other oddities, was not able to be delivered. So he's sorting through this mail, and he thinks that he begins to detect a secret code or secret communications in these undeliverables. Now, this discovery means that he is either going mad or he has stumbled upon a great and secret agenda, though the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. The Great and Secret Show takes the reader across the United States to a mystic in New Mexico, then a megalomaniac who leads an army of the dead across California in a murderous pursuit, ending in a Los Angeles suburb where natural disaster collides with very unnatural phenomena. A wild ride with evil characters, unlikely heroes, and plenty of action. Also, for action fans, we have The Damnation Game, an action horror hybrid, and Weave World, an action fantasy hybrid. Pretty much any Clive Barker book you pick up is going to be full of action. Action is another one of those things that Clive Barker does remarkably well. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Michael, blood, the tearing of the flesh, sadomasochism, horror, romance, fantasy, action. Okay, that's fine and good, but can Clive Barker make me laugh? What about humor? Well, like I said, I believe that there is a Clive Barker book for every kind of reader. And if you want something more on the humoristic side, I recommend checking out Mr. Be Gone from 2007. Mr. Be Gone starts with the narrator asking the reader to burn the book. Asking, then pleading, then resorting to bribery and threats. Burn the book. Because apparently the book is possessed by a demon. In fact, this demon, who goes by the name Mr. Be Gone, he is trapped in the book, and he's not happy about that. Now, perusing reviews for this book, I noticed that this book is quite divisive. Either you love it or you hate it, and that's going to depend on how you react to this narrative device that opens the book. Some readers did not like that. I loved it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was funny. It was unique. The story itself is bonkers. The narrator, he tells us the story of his life, which unfolds in the 15th century, and how he ended up being trapped in this book. There's tons of action and violence. It's all quite tongue-in-cheek, and it's a very different reading experience than you would normally get from a Clive Barker book. I had a blast with it. For me, it was a 5-star read. I thought it was fun and funny. So if you're okay getting your laughs occasionally splattered with demon blood and human blood, then give Mr. Be Gone a go. I'd say if you're not on board within the first 20 pages, probably no point in continuing. It's one of those books that you are either on board with the premise or you're not, and you will know quite early. If you are on board, you are in for quite a ride. And lastly, for my final category of readers of books for young readers. Now, the books I've talked about so far are not appropriate for 8-year-olds or 12-year-olds. But if for professional or personal reasons you are interested in books for young readers, Clive Barker has created a masterpiece of the genre. Now, I know I've used the term masterpiece quite a few times in this video, but this is Clive Barker we're talking about, so I do believe it is justified. Books for young readers, middle grade, I believe is the industry term. Clive Barker's The Thief of Always is a gem, a must-read. I've used that term quite a few times in this video, but again, justified, I think. The Thief of Always, beloved by kids and adults alike. I was an adult the first time I read it. In fact, this is a book I've read multiple times, one of the few books I've read multiple times, and loved it every time. The Thief of Always is a sort of fairy tale adventure where 10-year-old Harvey is whisked away to the holiday home, a place where every day is a year, which means that every day is Halloween with all the candies, and every day is Christmas with all the presents, and every day is summer with the sun and winter with sledding and snowball fights. The holiday home is a place where anticipation and longing are eliminated in favor of instant gratification. Seems great, right? Especially to a 10-year-old boy suffering from the winter doldrums. But is it great though? Is it really? The Thief of Always is a book that celebrates those in-between times. A book that manages to exalt the unremarkable days. It's a beautiful story with a beautiful message. And I am not the only reader who loves this book. On Goodreads, with over 2,400 reviews, it has an average star rating of 4.21, which is crazy high for a book on Goodreads. 44% of reviewers give it 5 stars. There is a Clive Barker book for every kind of reader. I think I've made my case, or at least I hope I did. Do you have any experience with the books I've talked about in this video? What is your favorite Clive Barker book? Do you agree or disagree with my selection? I always love hearing from you in the comment section. If you haven't already, do go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Help this channel continue to grow. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next